Hey guys, today I just want to show you how to do a quick DIY furnace clean for homeowners. So when I used to do property management, I can't tell you how often it would become fall, it would start to get cold, everyone would go to turn on their furnaces, and we would get tons and tons of calls of furnaces that just wouldn't start or they'd have issues because they hadn't been running for several months. There's a lot of things you can do to maintain your mechanicals in your home in better condition just by keeping them clean and maintaining them. You can of course call a professional to do a service every year on your furnace, but there's a lot of things that you can do, even if you're not super knowledgeable, just to keep it clean every year to keep your furnace in better condition. So this is just a DIY thing that I do to my gas furnaces. This is a new furnace. This was installed in the process of this full home renovation on this property. So it's a little bit dirty as far as just being around construction debris, but it's not going to be as dirty as a furnace that you've lived in a house and you have pets and your hair's in it and your dog's hair's in it and all of that. But I'll show you a couple things that you can just do to keep the inside of your furnace clean that are not super scary or spooky for a DIYer. And then I'll also show you one of the most common problems that I've seen as when I was a property manager of why people's furnaces stop working that you can prevent by just maintaining and keeping it clean. Number one thing you always need to do before doing anything with your furnace is turn it off. Make sure there's no power going to it. All right, so of course every furnace is gonna be different. There are some that are a lot older. This one, like I said, was replaced in this last year. So some of them are gonna have little twists on, or some are gonna have some that you have to take off with the screwdriver or a hex head. This just twists on and it loosens my upper panel. So once that's loose, I can take that off. And if my furnace was running, if I took this upper panel off, everything would still work until I took my lower panel off, because that's where I have my safety switch. If this is not put back on all the way and that's not fully depressed, then your furnace is not going to run. So just an FYI. I'm gonna go ahead and set that all to the side. As you can see, it's a little bit dusty, but definitely not the worst that I have ever seen for a furnace when I've taken a look at these before and looking at properties. So there are some just sawdust pieces, some debris in here. So what I'm gonna do is I have everything off, my furnace is off, my power to the furnace is off, and I am just gonna go ahead and I am gonna do a quick vacuum and get what I can with my just tiny little shop vac. Another thing you can do, again, making sure your furnace is off and you don't have any sort of ignition as far as like a flame, liver going, is you can use like a duster type material, like canned air, if you want to just kind of get into some of those spots that maybe you don't want to jam your end of your vacuum into. Me being not an HVAC professional, I'm always a little bit careful because I don't want to bump something or loosen something or dislodge something, but canned air makes you a little bit less nervous than a vacuum cleaner will, so you also can always use something like this. But that's definitely getting some of that stuff loose that my vacuum was not getting. Ah, yeah. So that gave us a really nice clean. If you wanted to, you could take your, like a very, not wet, but like a lightly moistened rag or a Clorox wipe or whatever if you wanted to wipe this out on the inside. But I'm happy with that. Now, of course, when you clean your furnace, one thing that you always want to do, and I'm not going to change this because I just put one in when we got this furnace up and going the other day, is change your filter. Now, some furnaces are going to have a filter in the furnace. Some are going to have them at the intake. So like I have an older house that has a furnace intake in the floor, and that actually has a filter over that. Sometimes they're in the ceiling at the intake. They're not actually at your furnace. So you'll have to research that. When you take your old filter out, it has the size on the side. Like I said, I just did this, so I'm not going to replace that. This is dirtier down here, so I'm going to spray that. One of the most common issues my renters ever have, or also when I was a property manager, my friend who has an HVAC company, he would always tell me if he wasn't available to come look at a property that I need to check the flame sensor, because inevitably it always seemed like the most common thing was the furnace was trying to kick on. It was kicking on, kicking off, kicking on, kicking off. And if you have a newer furnace, after it tries that too many times, it's gonna lock you out as a safety feature. So there is a flame sensor on your furnace, which is right in here. So in my case, it attaches right there, and that rod goes in and it goes, see that rod back there that it's attached to? It goes in front of the flame once this and this, all of those are ignited when the furnace is running. And that rod senses the flame. And because all winter, or as often as you're running your furnace, and that's hot and it's burning on it, any fire is going to release a burn off, right? And so it's burning off on that rod. And as that rod gets dirty, it gets a coating on it. And if it gets too much of a coating on it, that sensor cannot tell that the flame is on. And so it kicks everything off, and it keeps kicking it off because the sensor has a coating of filth and dirt and debris and burn off, and it's not sensing back to the computer or the motherboard or whatever that these flames are on. So one of the most common problems is that that sensor is just dirty. So you have two options. These can also get a crack in them, so then it would need to be replaced. But if it's dirty, it's a super easy fix. So a couple things you can do, like my friend, the one I went and looked at the first time before I learned this, he's like, do you have $1 in your pocket? He said, you literally can just take a dollar bill. He told me not to try to touch the metal on it because what it does, and I'm just gonna take my little hex head and I'm gonna take it out to show you. So that's what it looks like, that's all it is. And that's the rod. And see, look, I have only burned this furnace a couple times, and it's already a little bit dirty. So he told me, one, don't touch this and get the oils off your fingers on it. So I try not to do that. And then he said, you could either just take like a dollar bill and kind of get this coating off of here, this debris, or you could use sandpaper if you have some, or you could use like a wire brush. But every year, if you just clean this, you're probably less likely to have that burn up issue that makes it not be able to sense. So I just think every year before the fall we clean these off, we'd be less likely to have the problem that they can't sense. So I just happen to have this here, and a lot of times you might not have sandpaper, but you have a dollar bill in your wallet. If you don't have one, like I said, any type of brush, I mean, really you just want to get some of that debris off. So then we're just going to slide it back in there. And then align that little screw that we took out. And it's hard to see because in mine it's behind this rod. It might be a little bit different place than yours, but that's all that's holding it on is that little screw in my case. So just to show you where I'm at, your furnace may be laid out a little bit differently. That's the rod we were working with. That's the screw. That's all I had to unscrew to get it off. You can kind of see where it comes out and up right there. And then the way that rod bends, it goes in front and it senses the flame. All right, so all we've discussed here today is either vacuuming out your system, blowing off the dust inside your furnace with a canned air or a sprayer type situation, wiping it down if there's any surfaces inside that you feel like you can't clean off as good as you would like to, and cleaning off our flame sensor rod so that we're less likely to have an error with that throughout our cold season. And changing your filter. And really you should probably be changing your filter about 4 times a year is the rule of thumb that I've always heard. So now we're just going to go ahead and put our, in my case again, yours might be a little bit different. I'm going to put my bottom panel back on first. And I'm going to screw it into place or twist it. Now again, make sure if you have one of those buttons that needs to be depressed for it to function, make sure that you have pushed your button. I'm going to go ahead and slide this up, lock those into place until I feel like I have a, there we go, lock. And now I'm ready to turn my furnace back on, and when it's cold enough, this will kick back on. If you want to double check that everything's good, just go ahead and crank your thermostat up to get your furnace going again to make sure it kicks back on and your safety button is depressed. All right, so I just went upstairs and cranked my thermostat up super high. It's like 71 outside, but I cranked it up to like 75 to make sure it turns on my furnace, and I'm sure you can hear my furnace is going, but it's always a good idea once you mess with the furnace to make sure that it will come back on. Again, I can take this off and still see everything going. And you can see the flames in there. So my furnace is functioning. I once heard a horror story there was a home inspector in the town that I live in, and he did not, it was a vacant home, and he did not put the panels back on properly. So how I talked about the safety button here, that if I take this panel off, it will turn the front furnace off. He did not put this back on properly, and then left the property, and it was a vacant property, and there was freezing temperatures. The furnace wasn't coming on. No one was checking on the house because it was vacant, and there was a significant amount of damage, and the home inspector did not have insurance to cover the damage in the homeowner's home and would not make it right. So you always want to make sure, I think, if you're going to do something like this, that it kicks back on properly afterwards. Even if you might not need it today, maybe you're not here tomorrow and you need to make sure the furnace comes on. So now I'll go turn the temperature down upstairs so I don't make it crazy hot in here.